Imagine a war, but not over land, ideology or independence, no. Imagine a war triggered by a plate of pastries. History, my dear viewer, is often stranger than fiction. The year was 1838. The place, Mexico, a fledgling republic still finding its feet after independence. And the instigator? A French pastry chef whose grievance would become the foundation for a bizarre and costly conflict. Today we unravel the tale of the Pastry War, a tale of greed, pride, and international blunders wrapped in a flaky crust of absurdity. To understand this peculiar conflict, we must first understand Mexico in the 1830s. Having declared its independence from Spain in 1821, Mexico entered a tumultuous era. Civil wars, financial insolvency, and an ever-changing political landscape plagued the nation. Amid the swirling chaos of post-independence Mexico stood a polarizing figure, Antonio López de Santa Anna. Charismatic, yet divisive, Santa Anna had risen to prominence as a hero of the independence movement. He was the kind of leader who could rally a nation but also plunge it into turmoil. By the 1830s, Santa Anna was one of Mexico's most powerful men, serving multiple terms as president. Yet his rule was marked by inconsistency, sometimes championing democracy, other times governing as a dictator. This erratic leadership mirrored the nation itself, ambitious yet unstable, yearning for order but mired in chaos. The higher you fly, the harder you fall, they say. And by the mid-30s, the fall from grace of Santa Anna was cemented by one of the most humiliating episodes in Mexican history, the loss of Texas. In 1836, after years of tensions with American settlers, Texas declared independence from Mexico. Santa Anna led a military campaign to crush the rebellion, but was captured after the disastrous Battle of San Jacinto. Under duress, he signed treaties recognizing Texas's independence, a move that infuriated the Mexican government, which refused to honor the agreements. Texas's subsequent annexation by the United States in 1845 further deepened the wound, depriving Mexico of a vast and resource-rich territory. For Mexico, the loss of Texas was catastrophic. The young republic was already struggling to maintain its economy, political stability, and territorial integrity. The annexation exacerbated these challenges, leading to increased poverty, political unrest, and a weakened central government. Some historians argue that it also contributed to rising crime and corruption, as local power brokers filled the vacuum left by an overextended state. For Santa Anna, the loss of Texas was a personal and political disaster. Once hailed as a hero, he became a scapegoat for Mexico's failures, a man whose ambitions had seemingly brought his nation to its knees. Mexico experienced the positive and negative influence by foreign nationals, traders, investors and craftsmen, including one Monsieur Remontel, a French pastry chef. We do not know how Monsieur Remontel actually looked. According to our researchers, there are no specific depictions or descriptions of this character. But at the time, some pastry chefs looked something like this. Other pastry chefs at the time looked something like this. Or this. So I asked my creative department to make Monsieur Remontel look like this. His modest shop in Tacubaya became a casualty of this unrest when, in 1828, it was reportedly looted by Mexican soldiers during a riot. Monsieur Remontel demanded compensation. 60,000 pesos. To be honest, this was a ludicrous amount, considering that a good pastry in those days might cost a single peso. By our calculations, the 60,000 pesos would have been equivalent to around $1.8 million in 2024. Now that is a pretty expensive pastry shop, folks. But to the French government, his claim was not trivial. It became a symbol of France's broader grievances against Mexico, grievances that would eventually lead to war. In the late 1830s, France set its sights on asserting influence in Mexico. Beyond Monsieur Remontel's pastries, French citizens in Mexico claimed losses from theft, riots and government incompetence. Paris demanded reparations, including the infamous 60,000 pesos for Monsieur Remontel, and accused Mexico of failing to protect foreign nationals. The Mexican government naturally balked. How could a country in financial disarray afford to pay such an exorbitant sum? France's response was swift and uncompromising. Listen, we have to pause for a moment. Surely even the most naive among us would not believe that a warship would set sail simply for a pastry chef's grievance. No, the so-called Pastry War was about far more than the theft of cream puffs and eclairs. France, you see, was a nation on the rise, a player in the global theatre of imperial power. By the 1830s, its ambitions stretched far beyond Europe, fueled by a desire for influence, resources and control. Our other contender, Mexico, presented an irresistible opportunity with its vast natural wealth and strategic location. But here lay the problem. Mexico was in chaos. Civil wars, unstable leadership, and a fragile economy made it a risky partner. Worse still, French citizens living in Mexico, merchants, landowners, and business people were frequently caught in the crossfire of this instability. They reported theft, destruction of property, and even physical harm, and they looked to Paris for protection. For the French government, this was a chance to kill two birds with one stone. By demanding compensation for these damages, including the notorious 60,000 pesos for Monsieur Remontel, France could justify a show of force, secure its economic interests, and establish itself as a dominant influence in Mexico. After all, a nation that cannot protect foreign investors might find itself without foreign investors. And so, the pastry chef's tale became the convenient spark for a fire France had been eager to ignite. It was less about pastries and more about power, less about Monsieur Remontel and more about Monsieur Louis-Philippe, France's king, flexing his nation's growing imperial muscle. And so, under the guise of defending the honour of French citizens, France sent a fleet, not of bakers, mind you, but of battleships, to teach Mexico a lesson. It was colonial ambition dressed in powdered sugar, a story as old as empire itself. In April 1838, a French naval fleet led by Admiral Charles Baudin arrived on Mexico's Gulf Coast. Their mission? To enforce a blockade on Mexican ports, cutting off trade and strangling the nation's fragile economy. From the Yucatan Peninsula to the Rio Grande, French warships loomed like ominous shadows on the horizon. This blockade wasn't just a show of force, but an act of war. Mexico's government found itself cornered, unable to negotiate terms that wouldn't be seen as a national humiliation. By the time the Pastry War erupted, Santa Anna was a man in exile, both physically and politically. His defeat in Texas had tarnished his reputation, and he had retreated to his ranch near Veracruz, far from the political stage. Yet fate, as it so often does, offered him a second chance. By November 1838, the French decided that diplomacy had failed. Their cannons roared to life, bombarding the fortress of San Juan de Ulua, which guarded Veracruz. Yes, Veracruz, where Santa Anna lived. The fort fell with remarkable speed, demonstrating France's military superiority. When French cannons roared over Veracruz, Santa Anna emerged from the shadows. He rallied what troops he could and positioned himself as Mexico's defender. Though his forces were soundly defeated, Santa Anna's courage, especially his willingness to risk life and limb, resonated deeply with the Mexican people. In the aftermath, Santa Anna's injury transformed him into a symbol of patriotic sacrifice. The man who had once been disgraced became, in the public's eyes, a hero once more. But even heroes are not invincible. During a skirmish, Santa Anna was struck by cannon fire, losing a leg in the process. This injury, while debilitating, would ironically enhance his political career, transforming him into a symbol of Mexican resilience. By early 1839, the conflict was drawing international attention. Britain, concerned about regional stability, stepped in to mediate. The result was a treaty that ended hostilities, but left Mexico humiliated. Under the terms, Mexico agreed to pay France 600,000 pesos, 10 times the amount initially demanded for Monsieur Remontel's pastries, and yes, the equivalent to $18 million in 2024. The French fleet withdrew and the ports reopened. For France, it was a diplomatic and financial victory. For Mexico, it was a bitter reminder of its vulnerabilities. The Pastry War was over, but its consequences lingered. For Mexico, it exposed the nation's fragility to foreign intervention and set a precedent for future conflicts. A few decades later, France returned with even greater force during the Second French intervention, which involved installing an emperor in Mexico. And that, my friend, is a whole other story, an action-packed story of pride and failure. I will get back to Maximilian on a later occasion. As for Monsieur Remontel, history is still determining whether he ever received his 60,000 pesos. I doubt that he did. But his name lives on, not as a celebrated chef, but as an unwitting catalyst for international conflict. And what of General Santa Anna? He went on to serve as Mexico's president multiple times, though his legacy remains controversial. As for his leg, well, it was buried with full military honors, a fitting end to a tale filled with peculiar twists. However, his wooden prosthetic leg is to this day displayed in the Illinois State Military Museum. The Pastry War. This conflict began with a seemingly trivial grievance, but revealed the deep fissures in Mexico's political and economic fabric. It is yet another tale that reminds us of the absurdity of human pride and the far-reaching consequences of even the slightest provocations. And yet, history is full of such stories, where the trivial becomes monumental. Wars have been fought over spices, borders, and yes, even pastries. Perhaps the lesson here is that nothing is too small to change the course of nations. Or a lesson that pastry, if anything, holds the value that could spark a war. I do love good pastry. I do, however, prefer a classic Danish pastry. I hope you will like, share and subscribe to our channel, as we expect to provide you with loads of new stories from the old days. Until next time, take care.